Before we begin the story of why does the same cat sleep in this tailor's window every night? A cozy folklore mystery, I invite you to get comfortable. Let the world fade for a while. If you find yourself drawn into these quiet tales, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps more stories find their way to the firelight. Now, let's begin. On the corner of a nameless road, where moss slips between cobblestones and the lampposts have long forgotten how to glow, there stands a shop with a window that remembers everything. It does not blink. It does not speak. But it watches, with glass polished by time and the breath of winters past. And every night at exactly 7:12, a cat appears in its frame, as if conjured from dusk itself, curls into a perfect circle, and sleeps. He is not owned but known. By morning commuters, who glance up from cracked newspapers and nod as they pass. By old women who finger rosaries in their pockets and mutter charms under their breath. By children who count steps on the way to school and whisper that the cat dreams the future. No one remembers when he began his nightly vigil. But some say he's always been there. The shop itself is weary, wooden shutters kept open by rusted hinges, hand-lettered signs longing for the grace of faded ink. Its bell once sang louder, in days when wool coats hung proud in the window and fitting needles danced like songbirds on threads of gold. Now only silence lingers, tucked among the stitches. Behind the counter is a man. He sits in a chair worn softer than most beds, reading letters whose words no longer hold their shape. His hands, though aged, rest with precision, as if once they coaxed mysteries from linings and lapels. The name on the entrance glass, once proud and curled in copperplate, now lies behind dust and time. Tailor. Some say he never leaves. Some say he waits. But no one can say what, or whom, he is waiting for. And the cat? He comes. Every night. Paw over paw. Through snow, through fog, through summers where the air smells of peat and forgotten songs. He hops up, settles on a folded shawl of gray wool. His eyes, just for a moment, blink at the village below, and then close. You could set a clock by him. They've tried. Tourists don't often find the village. It isn't on maps, and phones lose signal 3 bends before the main bridge. But travelers who stray too far from the rails sometimes stumble in, looking for warmth, or something gentler. Eventually, someone tells them, "You've seen the cat? He only sleeps there, only there." A girl once tried to take him home. Wrangled him into her arms and called him precious names. Got 2 blocks before the purring stopped and her limbs felt cold as if touched by frost in summer. She let go. He padded away, tail unbothered. That girl never spoke of it again. And still, like the slow heartbeat of the town, he returns. And, perhaps more curious than the cat himself, is the time. 7:12 p.m. To the second. Not before. Not after. The tailor never calls for him. Yet the bell above the door gives a single chime, each evening, as though unseen paws press gently on the hinge. The wind pauses. Lamps flicker in courtesy. And then he appears. Some say the cat is a ghost. Others say he's waiting for someone. A child once said, without knowing why, he's the piece that was lost. No one had asked a question. They never do. But the window knows. It always does. In the oldest chair beside the radiator, Emmett Rowe sipped tea that had long since gone tepid. He didn't seem to mind. The cup fit his hands like a habit, the chipped porcelain bearing faded roses that once matched his wife's apron. The steam no longer rose, but he raised it to his lips, the way he did every evening, at the same time, whether the sky burned amber with day's end or pressed gray clouds into the shop's low roof. He was a man of worn routines. A drawer for chalk scraps. A jar for needles that had dulled. Coats hung as they had for ages, not for sale, but as memories held aloft on wire hangers. The sturdiest of them all had once belonged to his son, though Emmett never said so aloud. He just dusted it, every Thursday, and occasionally pressed the lapels flat with the side of his hand. He had outlasted most things, wars, trends, the slow drift of neighbors leaving. Once he had sewed for generals. Once he had fitted brides. Now he mended a hem only when the wind didn't ache his bones too badly, and he never charged. People still brought buttons, bits of raveled yarn, if only for the excuse to talk. Some left tea. One woman left a lemon scone each Friday, wrapped in wax paper with the word, "Thank you," scrawled on the edge. But Emmett did not speak often. Not anymore. He listened. To the crackle of the old radio, to the creak of the shop's beams. And in the hush between the hours leading toward twilight, he would lean back, just so, and face the display window. Not to look out, but to wait. Someone once asked him why he never drew the curtain. He only shrugged, shaking a bit of lint from his worn cuff. "There are things," he said, "not quite to the person, you don't cover over. Some things deserve light." The room always felt different after those words. As if the walls stood a little straighter. Evening settled like dust, quietly. The shadows took their places behind bolts of tartan and the brass clock ticked stubbornly, its hands drifting toward the familiar mark. Emmett, without needing to glance, reached over and pulled a match from a wooden box. One strike. One flame. One lantern lit. The window lit too. And then, 7:12. The door did not open. No footsteps crossed the floorboards. But the bell rang once, high and clear, like it remembered. And there he was, pawing lightly from the fog-thick dusk, tail curled as if sketching his own signature. The cat ambled to the window's ledge. Emmett didn't turn his head. He simply smiled, worn and small and not entirely meant for anyone to see. The cat leapt, stroked the air with fluid grace, and landed on the folded shawl. Like clockwork, like comfort, and beyond the glass, in a world muffled by chimney smoke and soft lamplight, villagers passed. Some pointed, some nodded absently, a few paused, hand to heart, before continuing on. Emmett could see their shapes, blurred by distance and dreams. He lifted the teacup again, long gone cold, and held it near his face as the steamless warmth filled the rim. "I suppose it's just us this evening," he said softly. The cat blinked. A blink that, somehow, said more than a nod ever could. The shop sighed then, a settling of age into quiet wood. And somewhere, deep beneath the floorboards or perhaps within Emmett's folded hand, a memory stirred but did not rise. The first snow of the season arrived without warning. It drifted down in hush-thick flakes just after dusk, cloaking rooftops and tucking itself into gutters with the weightless certainty of winter coming early. The village turned quiet, quieter than its usual hush, as though even the wind took care not to disturb the first of it. And in that lull, between footfall and flake, Emmett Rowe heard something different. The bell still hung by the door, still silent. The lamp still burned in amber hush over the counter. But the breath of the shop seemed to catch, just once, the way lungs do before a name is spoken, and then came the sound. Soft. Precise. Not claws, not tread. Just the distinct, deliberate press of paws on wood. He looked up. The cat stood in the doorway. No collar, no bell. Just snow on his tail and the certainty of one who has already been chosen. He did not meow. He did not hesitate. He only looked, not as if seeing Emmett for the first time, but confirming he was still there. Emmett blinked, unsure if the snow at the cat's paws was melting or if he only imagined it did. They studied each other, long enough for a breath. Long enough for silence to speak. Then, with the softest swish, the cat turned and leapt toward the display. Curtains shivered, the shawl shifted, and there he curled, not centered, not precise, but as though settling into a memory that had been waiting all this time. Emmett studied him, not just watched, but studied. The slope of his ears. The way his tail tucked. His fur wasn't sleek, not combed fine like those of indoor cats. But something about his posture, dignified despite damp paws, held more presence than most visitors. And yet, stranger still, he had no markings of frost. Emmett held his tea but did not drink. The flame reflected twice, once in the glass, and once in the curve of the cat's eyes. Those eyes did not blink immediately. When they did, it was slow, heavy, as if sleep already claimed him. "I didn't think you'd come in a storm, friend," Emmett said aloud, surprised by the sound of his own voice. The cat made no answer. But the room, perhaps, did. The radiator groaned softly as its heat pulsed out in warm waves. The seams of old wool coats gave faint, settling pops. And through the high windows, the snow kept falling, undeterred, unbroken. A note, like a scent only half remembered, drifted through the room. Lavender, maybe, or sage. Emmett closed his eyes, thought of old gardens, of hands pulling weeds with quiet care, of laughter under trellises. The cat did not move. Emmett, lured by that stillness, rose from his chair. His knees protested. His joints marked the cold. But something, some old instinct perhaps, stirred him forward. Step by step, across creaking planks, until he stood just beside the display. He didn't reach out. He didn't bend. He only looked. The cat's eyes opened again. Gold, like a coin catching twilight. He blinked once. "Am I supposed to name you?" Emmett asked quietly. The cat blinked again. Emmett huffed something close to a laugh, mostly through his nose. "Then I think not." Behind them, the shop settled again. Lantern light danced across the window in uneven waves. A gust outside tugged at the old sign, and far in the distance, too faint for most, came the whistle of a train not slowed by snow. "I'll fetch you a blanket anyway," Emmett said. He turned, slow as parchment curling from age, and returned to the back. When he returned, the cat had not moved. But in the window's reflection, Emmett caught it at last, a twitch, barely there, of the tail. As if the cat had understood. Or had been waiting. Ever since. The cat came every night after that. Not once did he knock anything over, nor disturb the shawl folded just so beneath the lantern glow. He wedged himself into the same fold of wool, nose tucked under paw, tail spiraled perfectly along his flank. The shop's walls, already fond of routine, began to shift, subtly, as if exhaling each time his paws crossed the worn threshold. Emmett, too, shifted. He began speaking again. Not to people, not really, but in quiet fragments to the cat himself. Observations, mostly. Musings. The fire's burning low, he might say, even though it hadn't been lit in days. Or, suppose they'll close the bridge soon if the river keeps swelling. The cat never answered, but he blinked, always slowly, in a manner less like agreement and more like acknowledgement. It was enough. Outside, the village took notice. Pedestrians slowed at the window, as if the amber warmth behind the glass had grown brighter, tighter knit, as though the shadows had been combed. A young woman delivering woolen socks to her aunt whispered, "There he is again," and the tailor's window became marked, not by paint or sign, but by the hush that fell around it. Children giggled in mittens, pointing as they passed. "He dreams of old things," one said sagely, nose red from cold. "Like castles and treasure maps." No one corrected her. Some things, once spoken aloud, are best preserved by silence. One morning near the close of winter, someone began leaving offerings. It started with a silver button, polished and bright, placed just outside the glass. One evening, a sprig of rosemary. The next, a paper scrap with the word, thimble, penned in looping script. When Emmett discovered it, he held the word in his palm for a long time, as if it weighed more than paper should. Thimble, he murmured, looking toward the curled cat. The tail twitched once. Do you wear the name, or does it wear you? Thimble, for he had become called that whether he agreed or not, did not depart at dawn, as cats often do. He waited, he watched, and he returned, always at the same time. Sometimes, when Emmett stood too quickly and the room swayed, the cat would be beneath the table, watching. When the tailor dropped his chalk or needle, and his hand did not retrieve it right away, there again would be the spectral twitch of tail from the corner of the room. Presence, silent and unwavering. One fog-veiled afternoon, a woman from the West Hills came in with a tear in her apron and a tremble in her eyes. She clutched a coat that had belonged to her husband and asked, voice wrapped in brittle thread, if it could be mended. Emmett nodded. She sat, quietly, near the window while she waited. The cat watched her. At first, she kept her hands in her lap. But slowly, without realizing why, her fingers unfurled and reached to touch the glass between them. Her breath fogged a small circle onto it. I never liked cats, she said aloud. But this one, he knows. She left with a repaired coat. And something else she didn't name. Once, Emmett awoke from a nap to find a young man, tall, cloaked in grief, sitting in the shop's worn chair. He didn't speak, just watched the cat, who met his gaze with unbroken calm. Minutes passed, perhaps more. When he finally rose to leave, he touched the shop door and, almost imperceptibly, whispered, "Thank you." They didn't see him again. And yet, though life did not resume its old rhythm, it found something gentler. Neighbors brought plums, candles, bits of thread for Emmett's dwindling spool jar. He never asked. But they came, and he continued. He stitched. Slowly. Occasionally. The cat climbed onto the windowsill at the appointed time, never early, never waiting to be invited. And there he would stay, still and coiled, as though charged by the very rhythms Emmett set into the brass clock's winding. One day, when no customers came and the air felt pressed thin by rain, Emmett sat staring not at the cat, but at the space behind him, as if searching for something long since mislaid. "There's a jacket upstairs," he murmured. "Tan, patch on the left elbow. My boy's favorite." The cat glanced back. Emmett's voice fell softer. "Too big for you. But it still smells like pine." Silence flooded the shop. Then the cat, as if moved by comfort or consequence, stood, stretched, and padded from the window to Emmett's foot. He did not rub against him. He only stood there, tail tick-ticking, like a metronome slowed by reverence. Emmett said nothing. But a thread, silent and unseen, looped once through the past, and pulled gently forward. The rain came in sheets, sweeping sideways through the village like it had someplace to be. Stones in the alleyways slicked dark and shone like old silver. Gutters murmured their hurried lullabies. Behind the window, the cat slept on, as he always did, uncaring of storms or bells that told fatter raindrops from the roof's curled edge. Emmett was folding a length of indigo fabric when she appeared. Not from the front, not from the back, simply there, all at once, like she'd always been coming. She stood dripping in the doorway, the hood of her too large green coat fallen back to reveal cheeks flushed from cold. She was young, 7, 8 perhaps, and too small for the storm's appetite. Her boots squelched as she entered. She clutched nothing, no bag, no umbrella, just the soaked hem of her coat and a look caught somewhere between certainty and apology. Emmett looked up slowly. "You need help, love?" The girl blinked water from her lashes. Looking not at him, but at the cat. He told me you'd let me wait here. The tailor's hands paused, still holding the edge of folded cloth. Outside, a gust flung rain against the pane like pennies scattered on stone. Emmett, not quite trusting his ears, tilted his head. "Pardon?" She pointed plainly to the window. The cat. Thimble did not move, still tucked into the cradle of wool, paws folded like parchment. But Emmett felt it then, a hush not of silence, but of something pooling beneath sound, like a held breath. "Well, then," he said at last, gesturing toward the radiator, "best not to argue with a cat who gives advice." She stepped inside fully, the shop closing behind her with a soft latch. Her coat, now fully visible, was patchy and fraying at the seams. It might once have been her mother's. Or perhaps someone else's mother, long ago. Emmett fetched a towel from the back without asking and handed it to her. "What's your name, child?" "Elsie," she said, swabbing at her sleeves. Then, "Do you call the cat Thimble?" Emmett blinked slowly. "Some do. I like that," Elsie said, walking over to the window. She put her hand on the glass, palm flat, inching close without touching fur. Thimble opened one eye and closed it again, as if in confirmation. "You may sit," Emmett said, feeling, absurdly, that he wasn't the one granting permission. She did, cross-legged on the rug near the radiator. Her small frame curled just beside the window's edge, close enough for warmth but not to wake the cat. For a few blinking minutes, the storm outside softened into background. Emmett returned to his table and worked in near silence, letting the familiar scrape of scissors and the dry drag of thread fill the gaps between inquiries. The girl did not fidget, did not speak, just stared at the cat, who slept with the peace of someone who's finished the day's work early. A knock came exactly 46 minutes later, urgent, stretched thin by worry and rain. Emmett opened the door to two frantic adults whose coats hung off their shoulders in wet disarray. "Our daughter," the woman gasped. She left the station, She's here," Emmett replied gently, ushering them in. Safe and dry. Elsie stood as if she knew it was time. Her father sank to his knees to hug her. Her mother whispered, over and over, "Thank God," into her damp curls. No one asked why she'd chosen the shop. Only the cat opened his eyes again as they left, watching without judgment. A sentinel. A stitch. Emmett looked at Thimble. "Didn't think you were the sending sort." The cat flicked his tail once, then tucked it in tighter, resuming his vigil as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something small. Something unspoken. And the shop, though unchanged, felt slightly fuller for it. They came quietly, at first. An older man with a limp paused by the window one Thursday, staring so long at the cat that he forgot the coins in his palm. A pair of teenage girls left folded napkins near the door, each painted with a tiny paw print in watercolor. Nobody claimed responsibility, but there was no need. The cat had become common knowledge, an uncommon thread stitched gently into everyone's daily hush. Over time, people began to murmur. Not loudly, not with certainty. But in half-phrases at the baker's counter or behind library shelves. "He always seems to look right at you, doesn't he? My sister sat by that window when things were hard. Said she slept through the night for the first time in months." Cats don't usually blink that slow unless they trust you. Trust, or understand. Emmett listened to none of it directly, but the waves reached him anyway. Bits of conversation left on doorsteps with scones, sewn into ripped collars brought in for mending. The idea that Thimble saw more than he ought to, that he was watching for something, guiding something, took root like ivy. One woman visited just after the frost broke. She bore no coat, only a shawl barely covering her shoulders, and her lips were pale as echo. Emmett asked no questions, simply gestured toward the window bench. She didn't sit beside the cat. Merely looked at him. After some time, her breathing changed. Not louder, just deeper, smoother, like a song settling into its final verse. When she left, she turned once by the door, laying a small brass thimble beside the latch. For the watcher, she whispered, and then was gone. Another time, past dusk, a man entered whose movements spoke of exhaustion more than age. Emmett noticed how he avoided eye contact, how his hands trembled not from cold but from something too long held. He said nothing, simply sat near the window as the cat sniffed once, then settled without hesitation at his side. Time passed. The shop dimmed with evening. Emmett heard no words, only the gentle shift of sighing grief. And when the man finally stood, he looked at Emmett with eyes less sunken, less stuck. "Tell him," he paused, then gestured absently at Thimble, "thanks." Emmett nodded once. The cat, unmoved, blinked in the same slow rhythm that had become his language. After that night, Emmett began leaving the shop's overhead lantern on even when he didn't plan to sew. Just a small flame, and a chair pulled out as though for company. A few came who said little. Some brought thread. A child left a hand-drawn picture of a cat curled in blue crayon swirls beside a stick figure man. Most didn't knock. Most didn't need to. But they sat, just long enough to remember something they had forgotten how to hold. One afternoon, while adjusting the sign on the door, Emmett saw 3 children standing across the road, huddled close. A boy leaned toward the others. "If you say your name real soft, he knows it," the boy whispered. A second child frowned. "Knows what?" The boy shrugged. "That you're trying." They didn't enter, only watched. Thimble stayed in his usual post, unmoved but present. As street lamps flickered to life, the children retreated into nightfall, taking the hush with them. Later that week, Emmett found a note wedged in the sill below the window pane. It was torn from a schoolbook, the handwriting crooked but deliberate. It read, "I said my brother's name." The cat blinked. I think it helped. No signature. No return address. Just graphite and hope. Emmett folded it carefully and placed it under the counter, beside ribbon scraps and pressed flowers from long-ago parcels. Perhaps he imagined it, but the room seemed quieter after that. Not emptier, just held. Even the ticking of the brass clock grew more certain. And every evening, as the hour drew near, Emmett would pause whatever he was stitching and glance, just once, toward the door. And each time, precisely, the bell chimed once. And Thimble came in, carried not by ritual but purpose, invisible yet understood. The visitors came and went like breath through linen. But the cat remained, a keeper of the quiet things. And Emmett, though he didn't say so aloud, began waiting just a little differently. Emmett had taken to writing notes. Not letters, not journals, just scraps. Bits of paper folded into corners, tucked near the lantern, slipped into drawers alongside buttons and chalk. Most made no sense when revisited. Some were only half sentences. "Remember the button for the blue, it's under?" Or, "He looked at me like he knew, and for a moment I..." They piled gently over time, like leaves outside the back step. At first he reread them. Then he didn't. One morning, he searched for a particular spool of thread and found 5 half-finished notes instead. He read the one on top twice, then folded it again and placed it in his pocket, though by midweek he would forget it was there. It began with small things. Calling the iron, lamp. Forgetting the way to rethread the bobbin. One afternoon Emmett stared at a patchwork coat for nearly an hour, unsure if he had repaired it or only meant to. He laughed about it, at first. Muttered jokes to the cat, to the radio, to the empty chair in the corner. But the jokes thinned with the light. One Thursday, he called Elsie by the wrong name. She looked up from where she was scratching dates into the appointment book. "Did you mean me, Emmett?" He blinked, startled by her voice. "Of course. Who else would I mean?" She hesitated. "You said Peter." Silence returned to the shop too quickly. Outside, a breeze toyed with the sign in the window. Elsie straightened, smiled with the gentle care of someone who knew not to ask. Thimble, from his place in the display, opened both eyes. Emmett rubbed at his temple and gave a small chuckle that never quite reached his throat. Must have been thinking of someone else. That boy who used to sweep the stoop, maybe. Elsie didn't correct him. She stayed a little longer that day. That night, when she'd gone, Emmett sat in his chair and stared at the flame inside the lantern. He didn't light it right away, forgot the match entirely, until Thimble padded softly from the hall and leapt into his place, gazing at the bare wick. Right, Emmett muttered, fumbling for the box. He lit it on the second try. The cat blinked and the flame settled low. He began keeping tea water on too long, forgetting it was boiling until the scent of scorched enamel whispered into his thoughts. One time, he stitched the lining of a coat twice over and couldn't figure how the sleeves had vanished. He would speak aloud now, not always knowing he had. That scar wasn't there, not in the photo, he murmured one evening. Hair always parted left, didn't it? Right? The wind, no, the wind did it. Thimble watched, unmoving, from the sill. Another time, Emmett came downstairs wearing mismatched shoes and didn't notice until mid-afternoon when a child pointed it out with a giggle. He smiled with them, laughed, even. But afterward, he sat behind the counter and stared at his hands for a long time, as if waiting for them to remember something before he did. He didn't cry, but Thimble left the window that night, padding close and curling just beside Emmett's foot, tail laid firmly over the top of his shoe. "I think I'm slipping," Emmett whispered. The cat didn't blink. He just breathed, slow, measured, like the hands of the brass clock, ticking somewhere nearby, holding the hour steady. And in the hush that followed, Emmett laid one hand gently atop the fur that warmed his boot. "You're here for something, aren't you?" No answer came, not a sound, not a stir. But the stitch in his memory, where a name had frayed or a date refused to surface, seemed to hold, just a moment longer. As if the thread had remembered how to run. Just enough. And so, the night continued. The window holding its light. The tailor holding the cat's silence. And the cat, watching, always watching, as if guarding the pieces too easily misplaced. She arrived just as the trees began to blush with early autumn. No letter, no warning, just the soft creak of the shop door and a shape against the light. Emmett looked up, squinting slightly, the shears paused in his hand. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he smiled. "Well," he murmured, "you've grown." Elsie stepped inside, brushing a leaf from her shoulder. Her coat was city-made now, neat seams and clean lines, but a patch at the elbow spoke of familiar repairs. "Didn't think you'd still be here," she said, eyes scanning the room, heart catching at how little it had changed. Emmett set down the shears and tried to stand too quickly. His knees had their own opinion. "I did go out once," he teased. "Or maybe I just dreamed it. Hard to say." She laughed, quick and easy, and the sound settled into the corners of the shop like it remembered the way. And then, her gaze stopped at the window. There he was, Thimble, exactly where he'd always been. Same twist of tail, same quiet breath fogging the glass with rhythm. His fur silvered now, weathered like stone rubbed beneath water, but his eyes shone as if lantern lit. Elsie stepped close, breath catching. "He's still here," she whispered. Emmett's voice softened. "He never left." Thimble blinked. just once, and the space between heartbeats filled with something unnameable. "You've come back from school?" Emmett asked after a while. "From my placement," she answered, tugging off her gloves. "Training to be a nurse." His eyebrows lifted just slightly. "Healer, then?" "I think so." She tucked her gloves into her pocket. "I'm not finished. Still learning. But I wanted to see if the light still came on at dusk." "It does," he said. "Even when I forget why I lit it." Thimble shifted in the window, stretching once, then resettling into his soft coil. Elsie sat in the armchair across from Emmett, knees drawn up like a child might. "City's loud," she said after a pause. "Even when it's quiet. People carry noise with them." "Yes," Emmett said, folding a swatch of fabric. "They do. I missed this kind of hush. The kind that listens back." The shop welcomed the silence that followed, as if exhaling its own relief. "You remembered the cat," Emmett murmured. "I never forgot." She looked toward the counter, the familiar creaks of the radiator once again part of her world. Sometimes in training, there's holding. When people are scared, you don't speak, you just hold. Emmett didn't answer. "I think Thimble holds," she continued, eyes distant. "Not in arms, but in being. Like, he keeps the world from unraveling. One thread at a time." Emmett nodded once, the movement small. "Would you like tea?" he asked. She smiled. "Yes, please." He rose, slow but practiced, and disappeared to the back. Alone for a moment, Elsie rose and stepped to the window. Her fingers found the small bloom of condensation his breath left on the glass. "You knew I was coming, didn't you?" she whispered. Thimble opened his eyes again. They met without speaking, and in the flicker of a moment, the past curled forward, silent as thread pulled through remembered cloth. The rain had gone, but the wind had stayed behind, rattling windows and combing the rooftops with long, tentative fingers. It wasn't cold, not yet, but the kind of air that made one light the lantern just a little earlier. The kind that hinted at change. Inside the shop, the clock ticked stubbornly. Emmett sat beside the window, legs blanketed, reading glasses low on his nose as he pretended to understand the words before him. He wasn't reading, not truly. The room was ready. The shawl had been refolded just so. The lantern glowed amber in its place. Even the familiar teacup, half full, waited on the edge of the counter, its steam barely visible against the dimming air. Outside, the town settled like a sigh. Shop fronts clicked shut. Footfalls thinned. Somewhere distant, a cart rolled over uneven cobbles, the soft jangle of its bells trailing off toward the square. And then the clock struck. 7:12. Emmett didn't check. He didn't need to. He knew the space of it, the way time bent slightly in those seconds before arrival. He lowered the book to his lap. Waited. The bell above the shop door did not ring. A pause. He glanced toward the glass, expecting the familiar ripple of motion, the flick of tail, the brushed silence of padded feet. Still nothing. He rose slowly, leaning on the arm of the chair more than usual. Stepped to the door. Opened it. Fog waited just beyond the threshold, thick enough to stir but not enough to cross. The street beyond blinked with the first breath of gaslight. He held the door a moment longer. Listened, but there was only the wind. Behind him, the lantern flickered once. He left the door open and returned to his chair, settling down with a long, exhaled breath. He watched the window as one watches a friend preparing to speak. A minute passed. Then two. Still nothing. No train, maybe, he muttered aloud. Lost his way. But the words lacked conviction. He poured the tea, though he knew he wouldn't drink it. Outside, something skittered, the sound of leaves perhaps, or a shutter coming loose. The fog pressed closer to the window, wreathing it in blurred halos. Emmett reached for the shawl in the window and smoothed it, palm lingering on the wool. It was still warm, but perhaps that was imagined. He lit a second lantern near the front pane, just to be sure. 7:29. He shuffled to the back, hands in his pockets, the silence now draping itself too heavily over the shelves. By 8:03, the window remained empty. The chair in the display sat blank. The circle of wool unoccupied. The sound came then, soft but firm. A brush of movement in the hallway behind the shop. Not the door, not the bell, just the creak of a board long thought silent. Emmett turned, squinted. Thimble? But nothing stood there. Still, he felt it. Something had passed by, or paused just long enough to leave a breath in its wake. The light in the hallway dimmed, and the fog kissed the sill. The cat had not come. For the first time in 16 years, he had not come. Emmett sat down again, hands fidgeting with the edge of his wool blanket. He did not speak. He did not rise again. But the door remained open. Just in case. In the pale light of morning, the fog had thinned enough for outlines to reclaim their edges. Rooftops, once blurred in the night's hush, reappeared with shy certainty. Among them, the tailor's shop stood as it always had, stoic, small, unchanging. But something was missing. The window, though aglow and orderly, looked empty. Emmett sat with a blanket drawn over his knees, hands still as folded paper. He had not slept. His teacup had grown a skin. He rose only when the mail clattered through the door just past 9. 3 pieces. A circular for boots. A notice about the town's fountain being repaired. And something odd, a small brown envelope, sealed in wax that had cracked around the edges. No name, no postage, just a stamp pressed into the seal. A thimble. Emmett turned it over once. Twice. Then, slowly, opened it. Inside was a key. Not to any door he recognized, brass, aged, oddly shaped with a hole too small to hang and too large to forget. He placed it on the counter as if setting down a story he wasn't ready to read. Later, as the day bruised toward dusk, something caught his eye. The flower box beneath the front window, not his, not tended to in years, had sprouted something that hadn't been there the day before. He leaned over slowly, joints caught in their familiar protest, and brushed away a dusting of rain. There, nestled among brittle ivy and the corpse of an old chrysanthemum, was a collar. Worn thin, faded with threadbare edges, the leather had softened from long use. Its buckle was untouched by rust. Attached, barely clinging to a loop of metal, was a small tag, oval and dulled, etched so faintly it might have vanished were light any dimmer. Emmett squinted. For seamers and seekers. He touched the edges, held it in his palm as one might hold a feather fallen from some sacred place. It was warm, or perhaps he only imagined the warmth. No address, no number, just that phrase. He stepped inside the shop, collar still in hand, and looked toward the window. The shawl remained where he had left it the night before, its center left untouched. Without speaking, he laid the collar down, gently, reverently, on top of the wool folds. It rested there like it had always belonged. He didn't ask aloud what it meant. Didn't speculate, didn't share the finding with the passerby who paused that morning and said quietly, "Thought I'd see him today." Instead, he returned to his bench, collected an old photo album from beneath a stack of unused fabric samples, and opened it across his knees. He turned pages without urgency. Weddings, coats, smiling customers outside the shop. And then, there, in a patch of curling glossed corners, a boy, maybe 10, with laugh-wrinkled eyes and both arms wrapped tight around a small kitten. Tabby. White markings down the nose. Unmistakable. The caption beneath read, "Peter, June 1985. The air left Emmett's lungs in a single, slow unravel. He looked toward the window again. Then down at the collar. And then at the photo still resting in his lap. He reached for it with steadier hands than he expected and, folding it along its crease, slipped it beside the collar on the wool shawl. Nothing moved, but the shop changed, just slightly. As if it had remembered something, too. He sighed, leaned back, and looked toward the sky as dusk began to gather. He did not know what he was waiting for. But he would wait. Emmett stayed in his chair most of the morning, rising only to add a spoon of sugar to untouched tea or to adjust the lamp, though the light outside never shifted much from dim pewter. The photo and collar remained in the window. He hadn't moved them, couldn't bring himself to. They seemed pinned there by something deeper than intent, like gravity or memory. Sometime after noon, he opened the photo album again. There were no more pictures of Peter after that summer. A birthday snap, a crooked drawing tucked between 2 pages, then nothing. Emmett traced the outline of his son's face with a calloused finger, down the edge of the boy's cheek, slowing where the shadow of a dimple deepened near the laugh. The kitten had curled in his arms like a pocket of trust. 39 years ago, Emmett closed the book. His throat ached in a way that felt less like sickness and more like a stopped song. He let the silence settle thick, unbroken save for the brass clock's tick and the groan of the radiator's old bones. He pocketed the collar before he knew why. In the back hallway, the steps creaked louder than they had in years. Dust curled from the banister like waiting breath. He passed the guest room, unopened for decades, and paused by the attic steps. There was a box on the 3rd shelf in the corner. He remembered it now. He didn't remember putting it there. But he remembered the box. Navy blue with corners softened by time. It bore no label, no tape, just a faint scent as he opened it, old fabric, sun-warmed wood, and something like chamomile. Inside, a wool cap with initials stitched in tiny red thread. A school ribbon, folded. And a scrap of paper with shaky, looping handwriting. "I'll come back, I promise. When the train stops singing." Emmett's mouth pressed shut. The candle of his breath guttered. He sat down right there on the attic floor. Called the iron, Peter, again that evening. Caught himself and laughed, but low, like wind through hedges. Then grew quiet. At 7 o'clock, he lit the lamps without thinking. Repositioned the shawl in the display. Smoothed both photo and collar in place. At 7:09, a knock sounded near the back hall. Not at the front door. Not heavy. Just soft enough to be wrong. He paused, tea mid-pour. "Who's there?" No reply. He stood, slow, joints stiff, and walked back. The hallway was empty, but along the wall, just above the wainscoting, a line of pawprints trailed through the settling dusk. Damp impressions, dust disturbed in perfect ovals, 5 to a step, moving toward the front shop. He followed them, heart strung between caution and wonder. The prints stopped at the base of the display. The shawl was untouched. And yet, warmth lingered in the fold where no body had rested. Emmett placed one hand beside the collar. Not on it, just near. The box in his chest tightened. "I know it's impossible," he said to the still shop. "But I knew those eyes. I did, even before this." From the street, 2 passers-by paused, glancing into the window. "Not sleeping today?" one asked gently. "No, he's there," said the other. "Just in the quiet part of the light." They moved on. Emmett, standing now at the threshold of everything he'd shut away, whispered, "I don't know if you ever left, or if I just forgot how to see you." The shawl lifted minutely, a corner folding in as if a weight had returned. Emmett blinked, waited. The collar glittered in a passing gleam of lamplight. From upstairs, a faint creak, floorboards shifting, as if someone small had padded once across the room and settled again. He didn't go check. He simply returned to his chair, folded hands over his knees, and watched the window. Even without a cat in sight, he kept the light burning all the same. It happened quietly, as these things tend to. The wind had softened into a hush, and the lanterns along the street flickered with the steadiness of a held breath. In the window, the shawl still sat folded, its familiar curve undisturbed. The collar and photo remained in their places, a pairing of past and something not quite named. Emmett moved slower these days, his steps measured not by age alone, but by the way time had begun to feel thicker, as if wading through light made of memory. He spoke less, forgot more, but still the lamps were lit at dusk. Still the window glowed gold. Still the door stayed unlocked for a guest who no longer came. Until he did. Almost a month after the unbroken evening, a small sigh stirred the glass. The clock had ticked past 7:12, threading toward 7:14, and Emmett had only just nodded off in the chair, when the bell above the door gave a single chime. And there he was. Thimble. No fanfare. No sound beyond the bell. Just the familiar scrape of claws finding footing, the light flick of tail brushing past a bolt of tartan as he crossed the room. Emmett didn't startle. He opened his eyes slowly, one hand still resting on the armrest, breath uneven. "You? I thought maybe." Words weren't necessary. Thimble turned once, then leapt into the window, curling onto the shawl as if no time had passed. But he was changed. Not in size or motion, though there was a slowness to him now, a deliberateness, like someone threading a needle in dim light. His fur bore more silver, each strand edged in softness. His eyes, still gold, had deepened, like tea brewed long enough to remember the leaves it came from. Emmett leaned forward just a little, elbows on his knees, studying. "You look older," he murmured. The cat blinked. A slow blink. One that acknowledged the truth of things without resisting them. Across the cobbled street, the lamplight drew stretched shadows. A quiet knock at the door followed, and a moment later, it opened. "I hope I'm not too late," Elsie said, stepping inside. A satchel slung over her shoulder, her jacket rain-spotted. She pulled off her scarf with one hand while reaching to tuck her chart book into the other. Emmett brightened by degrees. "You've come again. I had a few days off. Thought I'd take the long way home." Her smile was softer than it once had been. Older, yes, but still carrying that same inward warmth. She stepped closer to the window. And there he was. She stopped. The satchel slipped slightly from her shoulder. Her voice fell. "He's here, yes." Elsie moved slowly to the glass, fingers trembling just a little. "I didn't see him last time. He was away." Her voice lowered to the hush people use only at gravesides or miracles. "I thought maybe." Thimble blinked without looking up. His tail curved once, a crescent moon across the shawl. "You knew I was coming, didn't you?" she whispered. Silence answered, deep and not at all empty. She turned to Emmett. "He looks different. I think he's always been a little different." He gestured toward the chair beside the radiator, now hers as much as his. She sat down, unwinding her scarf, resting elbows on knees the way she used to. "I miss it here," she said. "It missed you too." They didn't speak for a while. Just sat in the quiet, the kind that wrapped around breath like wool. Outside, the wind moved slowly past the gutters. Inside, the shop seemed to breathe again, deeper somehow. Thimble stirred, repositioned his paws, and curled inward again with a grace that hadn't left him. Elsie rose after a time, walked to the counter, and set down a tin of biscuits she'd brought. "Lavender and oat. You always liked these," she said. Emmett chuckled. And so did he. He didn't need to name who. They shared tea, and the biscuits, and stories that didn't need their endings tidied. By the time twilight sank fully into the window panes, Thimble had not moved again. But he was there, and to Emmett that meant something had come back that had never fully left. The mornings had grown cooler. Not by much, just enough that the window fogged a little longer, that the wooden floor offered a chill even through thick woolen socks. Emmett moved slower still, but with more intention. He'd begun rising before the first bell of the brass clock, smoothing the edges of the shawl before the sun had fully pulled itself above the eastern roofs. And one morning, without plan, without prompt, he opened the old chest beside the stairwell and began to sort through cloth. Not just any cloth. Pieces he hadn't touched in years, ones saved with no customer in mind, no order ticket or pressing request. Just memory, stitched into hem and selvage. He chose 9 squares. The first, a soft moss green with a faint herringbone, the same lining from Elsie's coat, tucked away all these years, worn through one elbow and lovingly patched. The second, calico cream, faintly flecked with blue, from his wife's apron. Emmett pressed it between his hands a moment too long before placing it carefully aside. Third, red tartan faded with age, a wool as stubborn as it was warm. His son had worn pants from it until the knees had vanished. He found one of them, fray split and long since outgrown. Smiled at the ridiculousness of how small it was. More came. A corner of navy worsted once fitted for a wedding suit. A napkin hemmed with shaky early stitches. A sleeve from a dress made when the shop was young and laughter had lived full at the dinner table. He laid them all in a square, not perfect, not even, but deliberate. And then the sewing began. He didn't rush. Some seams fought him. Some held tears he had not known still waited. But he stitched each one by hand, no machine, no haste, just needle, thread, and the slow, unspooling ache of something worth keeping. Thimble watched from the window, paws curled beneath, tail flicking now and then as clouds passed. Each time Emmett paused, he looked up. Sometimes finding the cat still gazing outward. Sometimes catching golden eyes fixed on him, steady, as if remembering along with him. By twilight, the patchwork was done. A small quilt, no more than the width of a child's spread arms. Bound with linen tape softened by years of folding. Emmett brushed a thumb across the final corner. He considered embroidery but decided against it. It didn't need names. He folded the quilt once, twice, and brought it to the window. Thimble blinked as Emmett approached. Shifted slightly to one side but did not rise. Emmett laid the quilt down, carefully, reverently, atop the shawl. It settled as though designed for the space. Thimble sniffed it once, then settled back upon it. Emmett stepped away, but not before he watched the cat make one full circle and curl, exactly at its center, as if the warmth stitched there had never truly left. From the street, a pair of children passed. "Look," one whispered, pointing. "He's on something new. Maybe it's magic," the other replied. "Maybe it's his." Inside the shop, Emmett returned to his chair. His tea had gone cold again. But he did not mind. Outside, the sky deepened into that half-blue knowing, the hour before stars assert themselves. Inside, a quilt held memory. And a cat, folded in its center, dreamed. The snow had begun before the sun had fully gone, just a whisper at first, soft enough to miss between blinks. But by the time the clock struck 6, the rooftops wore white caps, and the cobbles outside the tailor's shop softened beneath a quiet blanket. Inside, the lanterns were unlit. The radiator gave no clank, no shudder. The shop felt still. Not wrong, not broken, just stilled, like a song paused on its final chord. The window, however, glowed. Not with flickering lamp or candlelight, but with the suggestion of something remembered, soft gold pooled just beneath the glass, illuminating the shawl and the small quilt now curled tightly in its place. And atop it lay the cat. Thimble, already there, though none could say how or when. He did not pace, did not curl or uncurl. Only lay there, serene, a slow blink giving answer to any unseen questions the dusk may have asked. Outside, passers-by slowed. A man with fresh bread in his coat pocket stopped mid-step. Frowned gently. "He's early," he whispered. A woman trailed behind him, lifting a mittened hand to her mouth. The lights. They're not on. Inside, nothing moved. But across the street, beneath a wrought iron lamp, Elsie reached the corner and froze. She hadn't planned to come. Not tonight. The roads were slick, her shift had run long, and the bag slung over her shoulder tugged at her bones. But something in the way the wind had lifted toward her cheek, had turned her feet. And now she stood before the shop. She stepped closer, squinting through the frost-lined glass. No light, no movement behind the counter. But Thimble was there. She pressed one hand to the window pane. Inside, the cat lifted his head. Only briefly, then lowered it again with the grace of cadence, of something finished. She swallowed, tried the latch. It gave. The small bell above the door gave a half-hearted chime, not quite certain if it was needed. The shop was cold, but not unkind. She stepped in carefully, breath forming soft halos before her. Her eyes scanned automatically, the coats, the shelves, the table by the window. The chair sat empty. His shawl was folded on its back. No teacup rested on the counter. No second flame sat in the eastward sconce. But everything else was as it had always been. Except quieter. She approached the window. Thimble did not stir. She did not call his name. Instead, she sank onto the bench, unbuttoned her coat, and reached over the edge of the display, laying her fingers lightly upon the edge of the quilt. It was warm, still, and folded beneath the edge, almost tucked from sight, was a note. Not much of one, just a few lines in a wavering hand. "Keep the light on. He always comes back." Elsie didn't cry, not right away. She sat beside the cat, head bowed, until the snow thickened outside and even the lamplight gave up trying to breach it. She reached for the matches, lit the lantern, and the window, once again, held its glow. The letter was found tucked inside the ledger. Elsie hadn't meant to look for it, had only pulled open the drawer because something had felt strange in the way the room sat, balanced and reverent, like a word waiting to be spoken. The ledger had dust between its pages, soft and gray like old breath. And nestled there, folded once and sealed with wax so faint it barely clung, was an envelope bearing her name. Just her name, no address, no salutation. Elsie. The wax bore the imprint of a small button. She opened it with fingers that had steady hands in hospitals but shook now, quietly, as though the paper itself was remembering too much. Inside, a letter. Neat script, firm at first, trailing into frailty. "My dearest girl, I don't know when you'll find this. Could be weeks. Could be years. But if the light is still coming through that window, if the cat still sits where the world can watch him rest, then I know this found its way home. The shop is yours now. Or at least, it always was. Some hearts come back to roost where they were first held gently. Yours did. So did mine. You'll find odd things scattered here. Don't move them too quickly. There's a green spool I kept meaning to use, left it in the drawer beside the old shears. Meant to mend the collar of a coat that never needed fixing. Behind the counter, there's a tin with a bell in it, small thing, from a long-gone collar. It still rings, but only when it wants to. Let it. Look closely in the window's wood frame. Someone carved something there once, not deep enough to mark, but true enough to stay. A word, maybe a promise. Don't be afraid of the quiet. It's where most love chooses to rest. And if he's still coming, if he still curls in that corner like clockwork, then you already understand what I could never quite explain. He stayed when I couldn't. He searched when I forgot how. He waited, even when I didn't know what he was waiting for. Keep the light on. He always comes back. Yours ever, E. Rowe. Elsie read it twice. Then once more, aloud, though no one answered. The silence that followed filled the room, not with emptiness, but with a weight that warmed. She folded the letter carefully, slipped it into the ledger again, and clicked the drawer shut. Later that day, she dusted the counter, rearranged the thimble collection, lit the second lantern near the stairwell. When the clock ticked past 4, she boiled water for tea, not because she needed it, but because she couldn't imagine the hour without it. As dusk drifted down the glass, people passed by the window. Children stood whispering beneath pink scarves. An old man paused, removed his cap. And in the window, Thimble sat, one paw tucked, the quilt beneath him brushed smooth from habit. No collar hung from his neck. But a glint, soft, quiet, flashed in the glass where the bell now nestled among ivy. Elsie found the key Emmett had once mentioned, tucked behind an old pincushion. She kept it in her apron pocket, though she never found what it opened. She resumed work at the counter as the day leaned into night. No one asked where the tailor had gone. Only if the cat still came. And whether, if they waited long enough, maybe something waiting within them might return too. And sometimes, not always, they stayed. Just long enough to remember what soft things still stitched the world together. The seasons turned, as they always had, and so did the village. It was slower in some ways now, quieter in others, but not asleep, no, never that. It had simply settled into a rhythm that hummed along under breath and memory, a kind of hush that wove itself through cobblestones and teacups, through fog-thick mornings and the soft flicker of gaslights in the window glass. The tailor's shop had changed. It still bore the hand-painted sign, edges weathered but proud, E. Rowe, Tailor. Though now it hung just above a smaller placard with a newer curl of script beneath. Thread and whim, a place for books, stitches, tea. Elsie hadn't touched much, not really. The shop still smelled faintly of wool and wax and lavender that clung to the beams. The floor still creaked beside the radiator. It still rained past the corner window in the same diagonal smudge each November. But now there was a tall kettle near the counter, and shelves of cloth-bound volumes stacked where old bolts of flannel had once leaned. People came in not just for hems, but for quiet. A woman whose father had been buried just that week sat with a cup of honey tea, her fingertips tracing a torn letter she'd tucked into her coat. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. A man passed by every Tuesday with his son, who carried a pencil sketch folded too many times. He always paused outside the window, just for a minute, long enough for the boy to press his drawing to the glass and smile. There were books for borrowing, stacked in uneven towers near the radiator. Scraps of fabric to mend heirlooms, or to begin something new. Sometimes Elsie stitched small patches into people's sleeves and called them blessings if they asked. But everyone came for the cats. Always the cats. The window held two now. Thimble, older but never frail, curled each evening into the quilt stitched long ago from pieces of soft memory. His fur had silvered more. Sometimes he didn't flick his tail in his sleep anymore. But he was still there. Paw over paw, watching, waiting, warm, and beside him, most nights, another. A ginger thing with eyes like moss after rain and a tail far too long for its frame. It had come one autumn and never left. No one named it, not formally. Some called it Thistle, others, Button. A few simply referred to it as Thimble's friend. The two of them, curled like commas in the same sentence, held the sill like a shared story. Some nights they'd blink in tandem at the street. Others, one watched while the other slept. The villagers noticed. Of course they did. They left small things beneath the window. Bits of colored thread, a child's marble, a pearl button once belonging to a wedding dress 3 generations ago. No one touched these offerings. Not even the cats. But they stayed all the same. Elsie came down earlier some mornings now, even when the rain hadn't let up. She'd sweep beside the door, set bread on the stove, and hum old songs without knowing the words. She never rushed. Time didn't bow to urgency here. In the soft glow before dusk, children sometimes gathered in the corner by the shelf of broken books, those too torn to lend but too beloved to discard. They say if you sit still long enough, the cat will blink at you, one girl said, her thumb pressed to her chin. Another nodded solemnly. If he does, it means you're going to find something. A lost thing? Maybe. No one laughed. And outside, in the deepening hush, people still passed slowly beneath the window. Some stopped, tilted their heads just so, and whispered stitched wishes into woolen scarves. If you're lost, they'd say, if something hurts where no doctor can see, go to the place with the 2 cats in the window. Sit there, just sit, and let yourself remember. They say animals know, she whispered. The words were not meant for anyone in particular. Elsie stood behind the counter with a teacup resting in both hands, watching the evening fold itself along the eaves of the nearby rooftops. Her apron still bore a thread from a pocket she'd mended that morning. Beside her, Thistle unfurled from sleep, gave a slow blink, then leapt down from the window with feline elegance, vanishing behind the stacks of cloth and books. Thimble remained, his breathing slow and steady as the swing of the brass clock's pendulum. His eyes were closed, but Elsie knew better. He missed nothing. She turned the small sign in the window to "Resting, but come in if you need," and reached to refill the lantern's oil. Just a flicker more fuel to carry the glow through another dusk. The wick caught with a soft exhale of flame, gold blooming warm against the window glass. Outside, the snow had barely begun, feathering the cobblestones like parchment scattered with dust. A figure paused near the curb. An older man, coat buttoned to the chin, hat slightly askew. He looked at the shop with an expression that was neither a smile nor a frown, just memory lingering behind the eyes. Elsie nodded once, unseen. A low sound echoed in the rafters, the wind bending through a narrow vent, too soft to name. Or perhaps not whined at all. She set the kettle on. Waited. No stranger came through the door. But a girl in red boots sat cross-legged on the floor reading a book about foxes. A widow delivered a parcel of marmalade. A boy asked if he might mend his grandfather's handkerchief, and Elsie guided his fingers carefully through the stitch. Above them, the clock glided past its 7th hour. She looked to the window. 7:12. Thimble stirred, just a little. The lantern's glow caught the curve of his spine, and for a moment he looked entirely ageless. Entirely still. Behind her, something settled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp or sudden. Just the absence of weight in a place where weight had always been. She turned. The spool of green thread had finally been used. An inch trailed onto the counter. Next to it, a thimble. Not the brass charm one, not any she could trace to inventory. Just a small, silver one with a nick in the rim like it had lived too many lives to mind being touched. She didn't pick it up. Only smiled. From the street, voices drifted in with the snow. They say the shop keeps hours for feelings. Not people. If your heart don't know where to be, it does. Thimble curled tighter in the window. Thistle returned, hopping easily onto the stool, curling beside him like thread finding the right knot. Elsie poured a second cup of tea. Left it by the chair. No one sat, but it felt right. She hummed a tune from Nowhere and Everywhere, then whispered to the wool-sung air, "He always comes back." And if you stand outside, just long enough to breathe once without rushing, you might catch it. That flicker at the edge of your eye. That chime no one touches. The cat. The little quilt. The light held steady. The moment the hour turns, and something returns, soft as a paw print, sure as a whisper, and gone again before you can ask what it meant. The snow had melted in quiet patches, thin ribbons of grass emerging like forgotten stitches beneath a worn quilt. Windows opened again, carefully, hesitantly, as if spring had asked gently rather than announced itself. Inside the shop, the air smelled of tea leaves and fabric warmed by the sun. A breeze curled through the slightly ajar door, lifting the edge of a curtain and sending a slow ripple through the shawl still neatly arranged in the display window. Thimble, now mostly silver with age, dozed atop the small quilt. He didn't stir much anymore, but neither did he miss anything. Thistle stretched long across the sill beside him. Younger still, restless in the way youth often is, but learning patience through proximity. Sometimes she watched the street with the same focus as Thimble, trying to understand what it was he saw. Elsie stood at the back counter, notebook open before her, pen resting idle in her fingers. Across the table, an old coat, navy with brass buttons, its lining torn, waited for repair. But mending could wait. She turned her face to the window instead. The morning light filtered through dust motes, a hush too soft to carry words. Children passed outside, one skipping, one dragging a stick against the stones. A slow laugh rose from the stool in the corner. Mr. Alford had returned for another story, pretending he hadn't heard it before. The kettle clicked in its resting place. "I dreamed about the train again last night," Elsie said softly, almost to herself. Thimble's ear twitched. A platform. Fog everywhere. But no one got on. They just waited. No names on the tickets. Thistle's tail flicked. She looked up then, startled by her own words. "Funny," she murmured. "I never heard it coming. But when I woke, I could have sworn it had just passed." From behind her, the brass clock ticked. Not loud, not commanding, but present. She returned to her notebook. The page she'd opened had no list, no reminders. Only a line scrawled in ink the color of early dusk. Some things don't leave, they settle. Outside, the sky brightened into the gentler blue of late morning. The village rustled awake in small ways, boots on gravel, laughter caught in wool scarves. A woman paused at the window and tapped a mitten softly to the pane. Thistle lifted her head but did not move. The woman smiled, nodded once, and walked on. The quilt shifted slightly beneath Thimble's paw. Elsie looked up just then and swore, for one breathless instant, that the fabric hadn't wrinkled, had pulsed. Like a heartbeat. She blinked. No change. No sound. "Still," she said aloud, "he's still here." No one asked who. The bell above the door didn't ring. The cats didn't move. But the corners of the room held warmth, and the silence folded around them like something worn and welcome. The spool of green thread on the shelf trembled, ever so slightly, as if low music had touched it, though the radio hadn't played in 2 days. Elsie turned the page in her notebook, wrote nothing, and smiled. The light came later in spring. Not in brightness, but in weight. It settled across the wood counters gently, with the grace of familiar hands resuming their work. Dust still floated, but it shimmered now, no longer hiding. The shop had begun to breathe again, less in memory, more in rhythm. Elsie stood with her back to the open cabinets, sorting a jar of mismatched buttons. Tortoiseshell. Pewter. cloth-bound and seashell-chipped. She hummed softly, almost out of earshot, a tune she didn't know the name of but remembered all the same. At the window, Thimble slept as he had always done. Not quite curled this time, stretched long, his chin resting on a folded edge of the whiskered quilt. His fur glowed silver-white where the sunlight reached it. Below him, tucked between the quilt and the base of the pane, a new thing rested. A stone. Flat, round, smooth as worn soap. Upon its surface, a tiny paw print pressed in gold paint, faintly smudged. No one had admitted to leaving it. They never did. Thistle had taken to rising early, securing the high perch above a shelf of repair manuals. She rarely left the shop now, trailing Elsie with almost ceremonial purpose. Today, she lay beside Thimble, one paw gently over his, not touching, just near. Blessing by proximity, Elsie had once called it, folding an old scarf by the stove. Outside, the world moved. Children carried sketchbooks and marbles and questions. A young man left pastries once a week without knocking. A musician sometimes sat across the street playing unfamiliar tunes on a dulcimer, notes drifting through a town that always seemed to know how to listen. Inside, the air warmed. Elsie pressed a patch onto a child's coat, yellow gingham, shaped like a moon. The child accepted it without fuss and whispered, "I think the cat's in love." "With what?" Elsie asked, smiling. The child pointed to Thistle. And for a moment, no one corrected anything. The brass clock chimed its single note. It was never wound. It simply continued. That evening, as dusk placed its elbows gently on the sill, Elsie hung a new thread beside the window, a ribbon of forest green, left to ripple slightly in the air like grass remembering a breeze. No tag, no name, just something offered. She paused at the threshold before switching the sign. Still open. Always open. Thimble blinked once, high and slow, then tucked his face fully beneath his paw, sighing into the folds. And the room, as if exhaling with him, released the day. Somewhere in the rafters, a board creaked. Not from wind or weight. Just the space where something unseen had once paused, perhaps still did, keeping vigil in ways words could not hold. Elsie poured a second cup of tea. Placed it beside the first. Sipped. Waited. Not for anything in particular. But the feeling, steady now, that someone, something, was always arriving. Even if it had never truly left. The rain had returned, but only as a suggestion, a mist more than a storm, drifting like breath on glass. It softened the world, turning edges to watercolor. Outside the tailor's shop, the cobblestones flashed dully beneath footsteps and tires, each movement muted by damp. Inside, time moved slower. The brass clock ticked, steady and unbothered. The kettle simmered on the grate. Soft lamplight gathered in the shop's corners like old friends, listening without demanding. At the window, the cats watched. Thimble, beneath the quilt, eyes closed but not quite asleep. Thistle, upright, gaze fixed on the fog where the road bent just beyond the bakery chimney. They didn't move much. Didn't need to. The shop moved around them, gently. Elsie sorted envelopes beside the register. Most were bills. A few bore no writing at all, just pressed flowers, or bent corners that suggested long pockets and forgotten errands. She smiled at one in particular, an envelope with no postage, only a single sticker of a marigold holding the flap shut. No note inside, only a pressed feather and 3 cat hairs. Elsie didn't question it. She opened the drawer beneath the counter and slid the envelope beside the others. Curiosities, offerings, belongings of no one, given by everyone. A knock came then, soft, barely more than a brush. She turned, but no face waited at the door. Only a folded note, caught beneath the mat. She opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper. He blinked at me. Just once. I remembered how to laugh after. No signature. But the handwriting was uncertain, like someone relearning the shape of their name. She held the paper between her hands for a long time, then turned to place it near the brass bell on the windowsill. The cats did not move. But Thimble's tail stirred once. Behind her, someone entered quietly and took a seat near the shelf of old storybooks. Another wandered to the back, tracing their fingers over spools of thread without lifting any. No words were exchanged, just presence. Presence had always been enough. The kettle hissed its low invitation. Elsie poured 2 cups. She placed the first near the window. The second she held. I sometimes wonder, she said softly, not needing them to answer, if this place ever ends. Or if it just changes hands. Moments passing through moments. Like stitches in a seam we only see when we look backwards. Thistle blinked. Thimble was still. Elsie sipped. Outside, the rain touched everything lightly, umbrellas, hats, curled ferns, and washed nothing away. Evening began to lean its full weight onto the rooftops, wrapping chimneys and signposts in blue-gray hush. A child pressed their nose to the glass before being gently tugged along by a parent's steady hand. They paused, looked once more, then disappeared into the mist. Elsie stood, walked to the door. She turned the wooden sign over. "Come in, we're listening," and she meant it, not just the space, or the light, or the warmth waiting inside linen-scented air, but the memory of Emmett, of Peter, of every name too sacred to write. The light did not flicker. It held, and in the window, 2 cats watched. And waited. And stayed.